This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. The maiden launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Now scheduled for just after sunrise Friday, it promises to be a spectacular, unmatched since this country last sent a man to the moon in 1972. The long countdown that began Sunday rebounded today from early delays and was back on schedule, with a poll of launch managers reported as nothing but a series of goes. Bruce Hall reports.
The Space Shuttle astronauts flying T-38 training jets arrived at Patrick Air Force Base near the Space Center this afternoon. Astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen said they were anxious to begin their historic flight in the Space Shuttle Columbia.
And we're really looking forward to the flight, and we hope that everything will allow us to go on Friday. It sure looks good for that right now, from what we hear.
The Columbia is in great shape, and the launch team tells us it's almost ready to go, so we're all looking forward to the launch on Friday.
NASA officials say the most likely factor that could cause a postponement in Friday's launch is the weather. Forecasters at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station say the predicted winds are not a problem for liftoff, but might pose problems for an emergency return landing if the mission had to be aborted in the first 4.5 minutes. However, launch officials say weather conditions are improving.
Cold front that was moving from the western part of the country towards the east apparently is taking a more northerly course and therefore having less impact on Florida. Consequently, hopefully we're keeping our fingers crossed that things are looking up.
This is one of the riskiest U.S. space ventures because it is the first time astronauts have been sent into space in a craft that has not been tested with unmanned flights. There have been extra practice sessions for rescue teams. Early this morning, Air Force helicopters descended on a shuttle mock-up for a final review of procedures for lifting crew members out of a ditched spacecraft. Divers are also being stationed off the Florida coast so they can pick up the astronauts if they eject before getting the shuttle into orbit. If there is trouble prior to launch, the astronauts will ride a basket from the top of the launch pad to the ground, where an armored personnel carrier will be waiting to take them to safety. The minor problems that popped up earlier in the week have been corrected, and the countdown is now proceeding on schedule. Officials late today said they are in great shape for a Friday launch. Bruce Hall, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Well, I was born and raised on a farm, and it's in my blood, and I love farming. We seed about 1,000 acres to hard red spring wheat. It's a special crop because of its high protein. When the wheat is golden in color and the heads are sort of a little bit tipped over, it shows it's going to be a good quality wheat. I'm proud of my crop. I wouldn't trade my job for any other job in the world.
Quality ingredients and special people help make Roman meal bread light brown, tender textured, and delicious.
Here's mileage you can be proud of, in a car you can be proud of. The V6 Cadillac, with an EPA estimate of 18 mpg and a highway estimate of 29. And the diesel-powered Cadillac with an EPA estimate of 21 mpg, a highway estimate of 33. Mileage you can be proud of, in a car you can be proud of. See your Cadillac dealer today.
One government agency that's asking Congress for more money is, understandably, now getting a deadly serious hearing. That's the Secret Service, which argued today that it can't protect the president from threats it doesn't know about. Bruce Morton has the story.
Heading in the right direction. For the second time since the assassination attempt, Secret Service Director H. Stuart Knight urged an easing of the Attorney General's guidelines governing domestic snooping. U.S. law enforcement agencies, Knight said, are handicapped and aren't giving the Secret Service as much or as good information as they used to.
The guidelines that the Bureau must now operate under, I think, are an overreaction, if I may use that, to some of the alleged abuses that occurred during the previous 10 years.
Knight said he was sure the new Attorney General, William French Smith, would be sympathetic. But at another hearing, congressmen were wondering why the FBI had never told the Secret Service about John Hinckley's arrest in Nashville with 3 handguns on the day of a presidential visit. Answer, there are about 2,000 such incidents a year. It was treated as a local misdemeanor. Nobody thought of Hinckley as a potential presidential assassin.
It is possible to garbage the Secret Service with excessive data. We don't want to do that. On the other hand, I recognize that Secret Service should be the judge of what it believes that it needs to know. And when we know that clearly, I can assure this committee that the FBI will supply it.
Knight also told his hearing the Secret Service has found no connection between Hinckley and Edward Michael Richardson, who was arrested yesterday in New York for threatening the president.
We feel quite confident that there was no connection between the gentleman arrested last night and the events that went down on March 30th.
The drive to ease the guidelines on domestic surveillance seems to be gaining in the Congress, though in fact no congressional action is needed. President Reagan's Attorney General can do that anytime he wants. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
Doctors at George Washington University Hospital say it's important for President Reagan to recuperate in a home-like environment. And they say he could be back in the White House in a few days. But as one put it, he won't be chopping wood next week. Bill Plant reports.
It now seems almost certain that Mr. Reagan will return to the White House sometime this weekend. His temperature has been almost normal now for more than 24 hours. Mr. Reagan's doctors say that his injured lung has cleared significantly and that he is up and around more and more. Former Texas Governor John Connally, who was wounded when President Kennedy was shot, confided that he had told the president not to rush things.
I reminded him that I had had a similar experience and that in spite of how well you feel, that you can't suffer that kind of a shock and that loss of blood and that kind of an operation without it sapping your energy, and that's going to take him, I think, a considerable time to get over it.
Mrs. Reagan joined the president for a chicken soup lunch. She told reporters she was carrying a box of candy from the King of Morocco and a picture of Bob Hope in an Easter bunny suit. There was no shortage of other zany gifts. In addition to the 74,000 cards and letters in the mailroom, there were thousands of jelly beans and a goldfish named Ronald Reagan II sent by a 10-year-old, which arrived alive, complete with feeding instructions. Despite the relentlessly optimistic tone of the medical bulletins, Mr. Reagan still faces a long convalescence after he leaves the hospital, and his aides are just now focusing on how he can handle the presidency over the next several months until he is fully recovered. Bill Plant, CBS News, the White House.
Most presidential proclamations get only the barest of publicity, but the one President Reagan signed today in his hospital room will not go unnoticed. It designates the week of April 19th as Victims' Rights Week for the victims of crimes. It reads in part that only victims truly know the trauma crime can produce. As the House Budget Committee continued work today on Democratic alternatives to the proposed Republican spending cuts, Chairman James Jones accused the administration of exhibiting a bunker mentality in its refusal to budge. Jones said no Congress ever has accepted such demands. He went on to say, quote, "It's not the job of Congress not to think." The Veterans Administration fears that up to 1 million Vietnam veterans may still suffer stress, depression, and other psychological problems. A confidential Veterans Administration report says experts estimate that delayed stress syndrome will get worse in the years ahead. But the Reagan administration today defended its plan to close 91 storefront counseling centers September 30th in a money-saving move, although the VA evaluation praised the 2-year-old program under which 52,000 Vietnam veterans have received aid. The Office of Management and Budget said a nationwide system of outreach centers is not a cost-effective way of reaching the remaining veterans in need of help. The VA report, obtained by the Associated Press, says termination of the program would mean that it was dismantled prior to the period of its greatest need. And some legislators expressed hope tonight that Congress would override the OMB decision to close those centers. The stock market was up today.
Don't scare him. Teaching my grandson to respect nature is like passing on a tradition. That's why we eat grape nuts. See, grape nuts is made with respect for nature. Made from wheat and barley. Prepared simply. Bring out its goodness and the good taste nature gave it. Nutty tasting.
Crunchy, too.
The way it ought to be. Feels good that we eat a cereal with respect for nature. Grape Nuts cereal.
Real old-fashioned coffee aroma.
Old-fashioned? Mom, this is new improved mellow roast.
New? But it smells just like the coffee my mother used to make.
That's because new mellow roast has more rich aroma than before and a new full-bodied taste.
But smooth tasting like my mother's.
You like new mellow roast, huh, Mom?
New for you, dear. For me, just plain old-fashioned delicious.
New Mellow Roast coffee and grain beverage. Improved for even more old-fashioned coffee taste and aroma.
Yet another ceasefire was declared today in the Beirut fighting between Syrian troops and the Lebanese army and Christian militia. But earlier, Beirut suffered its worst morning of artillery duels since this new fighting began 8 days ago. Larry Pentak is in Beirut.
Artillery erupted on both sides of the line between Muslim West and Christian East. But the Christian quarters took the worst pounding. On the ground, soldiers and militiamen clashed in some of the fiercest fighting since the Civil War. There was an important difference, though. In 1975, the army split along factional lines. This time, it was at the forefront of the fighting, standing alongside the Christian militias. In the past months, the army has repeatedly tried to seize areas controlled by the Syrians, who came here in 1976 to end the Civil War and stayed. So far, this is not a Muslim-Christian confrontation. It is a battle pitting Lebanon's political right against the Syrians and Palestinian units of their army. But Lebanon's score of leftist Muslim private militias have mobilized, and the danger of open warfare grows daily. For Lebanon's war-weary population, the violence evokes the horror of a return to a civil war which claimed more than 40,000 lives. Through the fighting here, the Syrians increased pressure on the Christians to give up their garrison at Zahle. That Christian town in eastern Lebanon remained under siege for an 8th straight day. The merciless Syrian artillery barrage continued unabated. Not since Sunday has the Red Cross been able to deliver desperately needed supplies to the city's 200,000 residents. The wounded in Beirut and Zahle now number close to 1,000. More than 200 have died. Many of the victims are civilians, for in Lebanon's wars, it is too often the innocent who suffer most. Larry Pintak, CBS News, Beirut.
The House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee today narrowly defeated Democratic-sponsored efforts to cut off military aid to El Salvador next year and to force the withdrawal of all U.S. military advisors from there. The subcommittee also rejected efforts to block administration plans to resume U.S. military sales to Argentina. There was new and harsh criticism from the Soviet Union and from Czechoslovakia today of the Polish labor group Solidarity. Using virtually the same language, they accused union members of being and receiving aid from counter-revolutionaries and anti-socialists. Strong charges in the Soviet bloc. This new assault has tempered the optimism of yesterday that Soviet military intervention into Poland might not happen. This optimism was stimulated by Soviet President Brezhnev's limited endorsement of Poland's ability to cure its own ills, and by a Soviet announcement that Warsaw Pact military exercises in and around Poland had ended. As Diane Sawyer now reports, those exercises may have ended in name only.
State Department officials watched all night for signs that Soviet military activity near Poland was winding down. But today, the department spokesman reported the Soviet announcement yesterday appears to have been an illusion.
What I'm saying here is that the military situation in and around Poland has not changed despite the announcement.
U.S. officials say the Soviet communications network designed to bypass the Polish army has been left intact, and they say no significant numbers of troops have returned to barracks. They say, too, there are signs that a new Soviet air exercise is about to begin. At the same time, U.S. officials say Brezhnev's speech did imply the Soviets will concentrate first on intimidating Polish Communist Party officials. And there are rumors from Warsaw that the Polish leaders have already been told to crack down on dissidents and perhaps impose martial law. And just in case the political pressure on the Polish government fails, one U.S. official said, the Soviets are keeping all their military options open. That's why, he added, over the next few days, we're going to be watching what the Soviets do and not what they say. Diane Sawyer, CBS News at the State Department.
NATO defense ministers meeting in Bonn, West Germany today called the communist troop movements around Poland menacing. And they added, quote, the use and threat of military force are incompatible with the expressed Soviet desire for peace and détente. Well, if Western diplomatic reports are correct, then the Soviet military occupation of Afghanistan is becoming the quagmire that many had predicted. According to these reports, 20,000 Soviet troops have been added in the past few weeks to the estimated 85,000 already in Afghanistan. One reason given for this large Soviet troop addition is an Afghan army severely strapped by desertions and casualties. Any look at the fighting in Afghanistan is rare. CBS News has obtained footage, shot just a few weeks ago, of one small rebel group fighting the Soviet forces. Jerry Landay in New York narrates.
The latest pictures from the mountains of Afghanistan suggest that heavier weapons have begun reaching the rebel forces, the Mujahideen. This 75mm gun's of ancient design, and its range is limited, but it packs a bigger punch than those outdated rifles and machine guns with which the rebels started the fight. The design of these guns can be traced back to World War I, but some observers suggest their production could be far more recent. The Mujahideen won't say where they come from. Egypt, Pakistan, or China have been suggested. The apparent aim of these attacks is to destroy enemy equipment while luring Soviet and Soviet-led Afghan troops into the rugged terrain where the rebels fight best. The Mujahideen complain they remain seriously short of ammunition. Shells are often delivered by camelback. With the coming of spring, snow-clogged mountain passes are reopening, and some rebel leaders are predicting they'll soon be on the offensive. But the improving weather will permit the Soviets to become more mobile, too. Jerry Landay, CBS News, New York.
Afghan President Babrak Karmal, who was installed by the Soviets after their December 1979 invasion, today offered a general pardon to all rebels who will surrender.
I got my John Deere lawn and garden tractor the same year my son Eddie was born. They sort of grew up together. And I'll tell you, over the years, I've had more problems with Eddie than I've ever had with that tractor. John Deere builds them tough and solid, and your John Deere dealer is a man you can count on to keep them running year after year. Or you may pay a little more for a John Deere, but they'll last. I'm not so sure about Eddie.
Boy, am I tired. I just couldn't fall asleep last night.
Why don't you try Sleepy's?
Oh, I'm afraid of sleeping aids.
I used to be afraid too, until I discovered that Sleepy's contains just one gentle ingredient that helps make me drowsy so I can fall asleep. In fact, the ingredient in Sleepy's is used in cold medicines.
That's good enough for me. I think I'll try Sleepy's tonight.
With Sleepy's, you can rest easier.
And you wake up refreshed.
The Senate Majority Leader, Howard Baker, says that when he reads his history books, he catches a whiff of a different Senate, of the senators grousing and growling at each other, even going at each other with canes. Well, maybe that's why most of today's senators don't want it all on television, as we hear in this report from Phil Jones.
Television coverage is a touchy issue for the congressional politicians. The House gave in only 2 years ago, but insisted that government employees, not television journalists, control the government-owned cameras, thus avoiding TV pictures of potentially embarrassing scenes from the House floor. In the Senate, the politicians have been seen through the eyes of artists. But today, Republicans who now control the Senate started trying to change attitudes.
I hope that what we will lay aside is the bias on this subject, if indeed any member happens to have a bias.
However, it was clear that Mathias will have trouble getting past the biases. Only one Democrat bothered to attend this hearing. Minority Leader Robert Byrd's seat was vacant. He even declined an invitation to testify. But the new Majority Leader, Howard Baker, was present, arguing that TV cameras would help restore the Senate as a great deliberative body.
You cannot earn the public trust unless you trust the public with the truth. Except for executive session when the gallery doors are shut and the cameras can and would be turned off, I'm not aware of a single thing that happens in the Senate chamber which the public shouldn't have the right to see.
The Sergeant-at-Arms testified that it can technically be done. So did the architect. And the Librarian of Congress called for TV. But away from the hearing room, major obstacles could be found.
With the kind of prima donnas that we have in politics, not just the Senate, but all government, that it will take a huge amount of additional time.
So some senators worry about what the cameras might do to the institution, and journalists talk about First Amendment rights. And Senator Dole, tongue-in-cheek, had another question today.
Little things like correcting the record, because many of us say one thing and it comes out another way the next morning. I don't know how we do that on video. Do we have retakes?
Phil Jones, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Defense Secretary Weinberger has recommended dropping the long-standing antitrust suit against American Telephone and Telegraph Company. In testimony last month before the Senate Armed Services Committee, just now published, he called AT&T the most important communications network we have to service our strategic systems. The 6-year-old government suit seeks to break down the mammoth communications empire into smaller companies. With Massachusetts real estate taxes the second highest in the nation, critics call it Taxachusetts. Now they're calling it Axachusetts in the wake of a tax-cutting proposal that could close Boston schools as early as April 17th, shut down the city's branch libraries, and lay off municipal workers throughout the state. Are those warnings the scare tactics of sore losers? David Culhane reports.
God help anybody who has their kids in public schools if things aren't changed.
He is a member of the school committee in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and the anguish he is expressing flows from the need to make massive cuts in the budget for education. Last November, a huge majority of voters approved a statewide tax-cutting plan called Proposition 2.5. The essential action was to begin a staged move toward limiting property taxes to 2.5% of market value. Massachusetts has one of the highest property tax rates in the country. All towns and school committees begin their fiscal year July 1. And now, all over the state, the budget-cutting knives are out.
This is bare minimum. We have closed every school that can be closed. We have consolidated everything that can be consolidated. We have increased class size to something that is marginally acceptable.
Fitchburg plans to dismiss at least 75, perhaps as many as 100 of its 325 teachers, and 4 elementary schools will be closed. There are also serious reductions in library service and public works. But the cuts that are causing shock in town are the 6 policemen out of 78, the 8 firemen out of 100, and the closing of 1 of the 4 firehouses. Some of the grassroots backers of Proposition 2.5 think the cities are using public safety cuts to pressure the state legislators to limit or slow down the tax-cutting move.
People out there who voted for 2.5, 60% to 40%, wouldn't have voted for it if they thought the only place to cut would be police and fire protection. So they're aware that this is part of the scare tactics that were used in the fall. They're being used again now. They're trying to convince people they did the wrong thing.
The truth of the matter is this: fire and police cuts make headlines. School closings make headlines. And those things have to be cut simply because there isn't enough money available when we're cutting everything else. But ask the head of the laborers union. Ask the head of the clerical unions in the cities and towns. Those people are losing their jobs too.
Statewide, local spending must be cut this year by $600 million, about 10% of the town and city budgets. The number of jobs to be eliminated is staggering.
And we're talking about thousands, in excess of 10,000 anyways, 10,000 people laid off. That's a very conservative estimate because school personnel alone are estimated to be 8,000. The school tenured teachers alone are expected to be 8,000.
And in Boston, they started this week to announce their cuts. 13 out of 74 fire companies to be disbanded. 3 out of 37 firehouses to close. 7 police substations to close. Police walking patrols to be virtually eliminated. And at least 200 policemen to be laid off.
We will reduce our employee force between January of this year and July of this year by more than 2,000 people.
Out of what?
Out of about 15,000.
The towns and cities of Massachusetts are looking to the state capitol here in Boston for relief. No one thinks the legislators will make serious changes in Proposition 2.5, but the hope is that the lawmakers will cut the state budget and significantly increase aid to local governments.
This land is your land, this land is my land.
Now special interest groups like the teachers are beginning to fight back. They're not making much progress. No one doubts that if Proposition 2.5 was up for decision today, the voters would once again endorse it by a wide margin. David Culhane, CBS News, Boston.
There are many medications for acid indigestion or heartburn relief. Which one is right for you? For years, Maalox has been recommended most by doctors. Now, the antacid ingredients in here, plus an extra ingredient, are in Maalox Plus tablets. Really pleasant tasting and effective. And Maalox Plus tablets also come in this handy pocket pack that keeps them fresh and sanitary. Maalox Plus for acid indigestion or heartburn relief. But don't just take my word for it. Try Maalox Plus tablets. You'll find you can't do better.
You see those nasty little characters? Those are termites, one of the most destructive creatures on Earth. Each year, they tunnel up from below ground and damage more homes than fires, tornadoes, or hurricanes. Terminix scientists developed a sure way to stop them. What we do is put a chemical barrier between your home and the ground that kills termites on contact. If you're worried about termites, give us a call. We'll keep them out of your house. We guarantee it.
All along, the convicted rapist said, "I couldn't believe it was happening to me." Today, after almost 9 years in prison, he got another hearing in a Milwaukee court, and Don Webster was there.
In 1972, a jury found Francis Haymauer guilty of a 1968 rape, and he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The girl, 15 at the time, said he was the assailant, and he denied it. Today, a sheepish deputy district attorney appeared in court to say new scientific tests show the wrong man was imprisoned for almost 9 years.
We are satisfied that these tests exclude Mr. Haymauer as the person who committed the crimes for which he has been convicted for, which occurred in 1968.
Judge Maurice Holes was told the assailant had type B blood and Haymauer has type A. The scientific tests to determine blood type based on semen on a victim's clothing weren't perfected when the original trial took place. The judge ordered Haymauer freed immediately.
I'm going to take a long walk in the woods. I haven't touched a tree in a long time.
Haymauer's 10 brothers and sisters spent almost $20,000 in the long effort to get him free.
There's no way you're going to make up 9 years of your life, especially at the age he is. Now he's coming out, he's approximately 60 years old, and where does he go?
A chilling thought about the case. If Haymauer were innocent and had happened to have type B blood, he'd still be in prison, with 51 years of his sentence left to serve. Don Webster, CBS News, Milwaukee.
That's our report for this Wednesday. Dan Rather, CBS News, New York. Good night.
Lots of families worry about money, but not us, because we're not alone.
We belong to a credit union, and we use it.
My paycheck goes straight in. It's like keeping the money in the family, because the members own the credit union.
And credit unions aren't out to make a profit.
That's why I got a low rate on my car loan.
That's why I get high interest on my savings.
We're a strong family, and we're part of one that's even stronger. America's Credit Unions. A family 44 million strong.
The making of Taster's Choice. Take the best ground roast fresh perk coffee you know how to make. Then freeze it. To lock in all that fresh perked flavor when you remove the ice, you'll have rich, natural chunks of freeze-dried coffee made by a premium process that's unlike ordinary heat drying. Taster's Choice, regular and green label decaffeinated. The only leading coffee that's freeze-dried.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. This is CBS.
Police Lieutenant Fred Cobb has been given a 30-day suspension stemming from the accidental killing of Linda Sumler. Details coming up next on Eyewitness News.
10 seconds. The pain begins. In your flesh. In your brain. 15 seconds. You can't breathe. It chokes you. It destroys you. 20 seconds. You explode. Experience